some of you may not know that there are different kinds of churches. There's parish churches, and then there's, of course, cathedrals. A lot of people think that any big church is a cathedral. This is definitely wrong. A cathedral is the bishop's seat. It has the throne in it. It's called a cathedra. That's why it's called cathedral. The building is called a cathedral. Any big church is not a cathedral. Right, so an abbey is outside that. We have parish churches and cathedrals in the regular ecclesiastical organization. Abbeys are slightly outside that. The abbey that I'm going to be discussing today belongs to the Cistercian order, which is part of the Benedictine family. You may not have heard of Cistercians, but you may have heard of Trappists. All Trappists are Cistercian. Not all Cistercians are Trappist. So anyway, that's the same family that we're looking at. And they all live by the holy rule of St. Benedict. Benedict was a hermit in the 6th century. He lived in a grotto south of Rome, and a lot of people came to visit him. Hermits with visitors, that can last a short time, but perhaps not too long. And he saw that so many people visited him that he wrote a rule that still survives today. Many thousands of people live by it today. And it was written so that people could live together, sort of like hermits, but in a community. It's a very short book, 72 chapters, definitely worth reading. Some of the chapters are 5 lines, so it's not extensive. But this book became a bestseller in the Middle Ages. After the New Testament, it was the most frequently copied book. Now, in the 9th century, it's Charlemagne who really pushed the rule of St. Benedict to found abbeys all over his domain, which, as you know, was most of France and more besides. And in that, he established schools and monasteries. Monastery and abbey I'll use as the same meaning today. And so these abbeys were built all over France and other places in order to promote learning, and also to copy books and, well, promote learning in general, whether it's schools or more arcane learning. Monte Cassino Abbey is the place that Benedict founded, south of Rome. This is what it looks like today in the bottom picture. It's in southern Italy. It's on the top of a hill. And as a result, Benedictine abbeys, as they're called, those that followed the rule of St. Benedict, are most always found on hills. So when you're traveling around, if you see a building on top of a hill, it's either probably a castle or a Benedictine abbey, because those are the people that swooped up all the hills. Now, in this picture, I have a little tree of the Benedictine family, and we're looking at that big solid trunk of Benedictines. And you'll notice that the roots of the tree are based on some of the fathers of the church, some of the previous writers to Benedict. So he didn't just pull this out of a hat. He's basing it on his knowledge of his forerunners, and then wrote the rule out of that. Benedictines all wear black cowls, black clothing. Their habit looks like this in foregone days on the left and modern days on the right. And that's why we call them black monks, because they're dressed in black robes. Now, to look at the architectural point of how monasteries function, this is a 9th century plan that was drawn probably as a sort of model of what an abbey should look like when a new group of monks sets out to form a new abbey. We don't know any abbey that looks exactly like this, but in general, what you see here is the red buildings are where the monks actually live. So we have the church, the dormitory, the refectory where they eat, and then the storeroom. And then the other colors are different other aspects of the abbey. For example, sick monks are here in the infirmary. The blue part is novices. So where young men who wish to join the order come and live separately while they're kind of in monk school, we could call it. Then other things have to do with guests, because the rule of St. Benedict says that you should receive a guest as though he were Christ. So you can imagine what that means. Guest house, even an infirmary for guests. Then, of course, we have the gardens. We have everything to do with cooking. It's a very functional plan, in that the color coding lets us see that the different functions of the abbey are grouped together for maximum efficiency. I will come back to that, but I want to show you a Benedictine abbey. I've taken the liberty of tipping that plan on its nose in order to show you an example of this abbey in southern France, Saint-Martin-de-Canigou. First of all, we have the church. Churches faced east whenever possible. If it's not possible, then they face some other direction. But if they face east whenever it's feasible to do so on the piece of land that they're given. And as you can see, this piece of land is far from flat. Then we have the dormitory next to it. And that means that the monks can go out of the dormitory directly into the church at night for what's called the night office. Storeroom on the opposite side, parallel to the dormitory. And then connecting these buildings are cloister galleries. They're open to the air, and in the middle is the cloister, and cloister literally means enclosed space. I have dug a number or excavated a number of cloisters, and we find all sorts of things in there, like buttons and shoe soles that need to be fixed, and that's where we think monks are sitting in the sunlight doing their little daily chores. And then here we have a problem, because in that space we should have another building, but it can't go there. The refectory can't go here for obvious reasons. They've expanded this cloister to be as large as it possibly can be. And so they had to move the refectory here. And I show this because this is not something that's followed in a rigid fashion. You have to do it according to what you've got in terms of land. Now, to bring us to Cistercians, the Cistercians are this branch over here. Cistercians follow the Benedictine rule. They were founded in 1098, so some 5 centuries after Benedict wrote the rule, even longer than that, in fact. And by this time, the Benedictines and the Cluniacs, who are this branch here, they've died out now, whereas Benedictines continue and Cistercians continue today. Cistercians were founded because a group of monks in a Benedictine abbey in Burgundy wanted to go back to living the holy rule of Saint Benedict in its strictest form, as it had been written many centuries before. The Cluniacs especially, and the Benedictines also, had gotten a bit lax with it, had gotten more interested in liturgy, masses going on somewhere in the abbey every minute, almost. And Cistercians wanted to get back to the old idea of ora et labora, work and prayer. So Cistercians go back, they strip away a lot of the accretions on the rule that had happened over the centuries, and they go back to living the rule as it was written in the beginning. Now, Cistercian abbeys are not built on top of hills. By this time, by the 12th century, there aren't an awful lot of hills left. Cistercians build in valleys. Now, there are lots of silly things that have been written about this, like, they like it to be in unhealthy places, and then they get sick and die and go to God sooner, and so on. That's ridiculous. They're building in valleys because valleys are available. Valleys were considered by medieval medicine to be unhealthy places. Mephitic vapors were said to come off the streams or rivers in the morning, and this was an unhealthy thing. Well, we all know that mist comes off rivers in the morning, but nowadays people live by the shore and no one seems to suffer too much from it if there's no flooding. Another reason Cistercians build often in valleys, I think, is because in a river, at any time in history, if you look at a map, rivers often serve as boundaries. So what we have is rivers as boundaries between sometimes unfriendly counties. So you may get the count on one side and the count on the other who are not friends. They may even have been at war with one another, as is the case with Pontigny. And so valleys are not seen as really nice places to live. So when Cistercians move there, they have to become friends with neighbors on both sides. And they do that. And I'll get back to that in a minute. So here's just a few examples. Léoncelle is in the pre-Alps, toward the south of France. Senanque, of course, in the south, one of the 3 sisters in a lavender valley. And in fact, the monks there today make their living from essence of lavender that they grow. You can see it in the foreground. And of course, many of you probably have heard of Fontenay, a UNESCO World Property. And I bring Fontenay in here because they have beautiful aerial photos of it, for one thing, and for another, because it's privately owned, and thereby they have lots and lots of publicity. They charge quite a hefty entrance fee, and the money goes to keeping up the abbey. Now, Fontenay, if you'll notice, here's the plan. I've put it next to the plan of St. Gall on the left, so you can see that here we have the church, here we have the church, cloister, cloister, dormitory, dormitory. So they're following the plan of St. Gall because almost all abbeys do whenever the landscape allows them to do that. Now, Cistercians are called white monks, distinguishing them from the black monks, the Benedictines. They wear unbleached habits. That's true in this historic image on the right and also on a photo on the left. So that's how one way that we can distinguish them from the Benedictines is visually by what they wear. Now, I brought this little schema in so you can see where Pontigny fits in it. Citeaux was founded in 1098. And 14 years later, they had too many monks to live there, so they sent out a group. It's supposed to be 12 monks and an abbot to imitate Christ and the 12 apostles. Whether that was actually followed right down to the last man, we have no way of knowing because we don't have any records of that sort of thing. If only we had records that said, "Hi, Mom, today I went out with 11 other monks and we've made a new abbey," but we have absolutely nothing like that written in the Middle Ages. So La Ferté is founded in 1112, Pontigny 2 years later, and then Clairvaux with Bernard of Clairvaux, the great Cistercian of the 12th century, as abbot, and Morimond the same year. Of these 5 abbeys, Pontigny is the only one that has its church and some of its medieval buildings. The others have all been rebuilt or destroyed. Now, in turn, each of these abbeys went on, and Citeaux, to found more abbeys. So that by the end of the Middle Ages, we had a couple thousand abbeys, maybe about 1,800 abbeys. It's quite hard to pin down the exact number because many of them did not survive till the French Revolution when we have better records. And of course, they were founded in other countries as well. Pontigny went on to found a number of abbeys that then, when they get too big, found another abbey. When they get too big, found another abbey. So Pontigny has 44 daughter abbeys and granddaughter abbeys. Now, how do you study an abbey? Because that's been the kind of major quest of my life for a number of decades. First of all, there are no medieval plans. There is no such thing as a plan of any medieval building until the 14th century. So we have to work from other ways to try to figure out how these abbeys were built. And that's what I'm trying to do with Pontigny. And I've been doing that for a bit. So here we have Pontigny Abbey. Here's the church. Here's the alley leading to it. And here we have the only other 12th century building. That's the Lay Brothers building. Lay Brothers are not monks. They are men who nevertheless take vows of poverty, chastity, and obedience, as do the monks. They live at the abbeys, but they really run the granges or the farms that are out further away. A monk can't spend overnight outside the abbey walls. So if you have a farm that's 10 kilometers away, you can't get back in time and you can't come back for all the offices because it's too far. So Lay Brothers have their own rule, and they always have a building at the abbey itself so that on Sundays and feast days, they can come back to the offices, the services that are being held. You see, part of the precinct wall is still there. It went around here and all around here and over to here originally. But of course, at the French Revolution in 1790, this land was entirely sold. And what remained was the church, which was the church and some land around it, which became a parish church, and it still is the parish church of Pontigny. Now, as to plans, this is the oldest plan that exists, although we don't currently know where it is. I found it in a chicken coop about 30 years ago, and the farmer's wife who had it disappeared it shortly after that. She gave me an hour with it, and I photographed every inch of it, and those are the only existing plans of the original. However, a drawing was made of it in 1839, so somebody saw it at that time. And this is the drawing that has been published and that people use. I've looked at it very carefully, and it is almost perfectly accurate compared to the original of 1760. So if we look at that plan, we get an idea of the outline of the land as it was at the time this plan was drawn up. Now, if we just compare that very briefly to the plan of St. Gall, again, you'll see that it's quite similar, excepting that in the plan of St. Gall, the cloister is to the south. In Pontigny, the cloister is to the north. Now, often you'd put the cloister to the south, especially if you're in Northern Europe, because you get this more sun in the summertime, in the wintertime as well as the summertime. So it's kind of odd that in Pontigny you have this massive church and the cloister to the north. This photo was taken, I think, in the late fall. So you can see that the church itself is high enough that it casts a big shadow on the cloister. And you might wonder, when the monks are going to sit out there and try to dry those hosts that they're making for Mass, or dry the manuscript ink from the manuscript they're copying, why did they put the cloister to the north? Well, the answer is simple. This is where the water is. Right, so where the water is what determines where you place all the rest of your buildings. You try to put the church on the highest ground. And by the way, even though this looks flat, this is not flat. It's sloping. The river is, let's see, the river is here, snakes up here. And then we'll see how they built a dam in the 12th century, first thing, probably before the buildings, and brought the water right into the cloister so they would have water running through it for hygiene purposes. Now, I thought before I show you how I'm studying it, we'll take a quick tour of it. So outside the church, I just mentioned we have the cloister, the lay brothers building, and then all the land that goes around here. And that's just been sold. And I'll talk a little bit more about that at the end if we have time. So here we have the cloister gallery. The cloister itself is no longer complete. It had 4 galleries that went around it, but the buildings that extended from this transept of the church were taken down, along with the ones that were here. They were taken down after the Revolution when the abbey was sold. So we're looking here at the one remaining cloister gallery that was rebuilt in the 17th and 18th centuries to raise it up. They apparently had a dampness problem out here. And a lot of the flooring was mossy or even wet, and so they had to raise the level of that. The Lay Brothers building, also a 12th century building, is a beautiful building, and that, if you can imagine that, twice as long, extending from this part of the church, that would have been the monks' building. Unfortunately, we no longer have that, but we can look at the inside of the Lay Brothers building. Of course, now it has stone floors. We don't know what kind of floor it had originally, but this is where the Lay Brothers slept. This fireplace is 20th century. That was built when the property was owned by a private owner in the early 20th century. But it had nice light up there. Wouldn't, of course, have had glass. Would have had probably some kind of shutters that would have been open in the day for sunlight and ventilation. Of course, as a major large building in the Yonne, the Département de Yonne, it was requisitioned by the French government at the First World War, and it was this very building was turned into a military hospital. Other than that, we have this fountain. There are 2 of them. This one weighs 6 metric tons. It has 34 holes around the outside. And it was fitted one time with lead pipes, and that's where the monks would wash their hands before going to the refectory for the prayers before meals. It's very ingeniously conceived, and it's something that I'm working on studying right now. It wasn't originally in this location. It would have been in the cloister. Now, this is a drawing made in 1796. That's something I use a lot to compare to the buildings that are there now. And you can see quite a few buildings that have since disappeared, including this one. This was built for the abbots, but not the abbots who were elected by the monks. It was built in the post-medieval period by what are called the commendatory abbots. A commendatory abbot is an abbot appointed by the king or the pope who sometimes lived at the abbey, but sometimes he didn't. It really was a cash cow for him. He might have lived in Paris at his own chateau. He might have been commendatory abbot of 6 or 8 different abbeys. He would fix the number of monks that he said he would feed at a certain number. And if more monks wanted to join, they had to wait till someone died. This building has been destroyed now, but it also housed quite a large book collection amassed by a number of the abbots, both commendatory and elected abbots. Pontigny was under the commendatory system for about a little more than 100 years, and they didn't get out from under it until the 17th century, at which time there was a lot of work that needed to be done. If you don't believe me, think about if you don't fix your house for 100 years or even 20. And so we had leaky roofs, we had broken windows, we had all sorts of things. And big campaigns had to be undertaken then in the later 17th and 18th centuries to get the abbey back in shape. Now, I'll just run you through this drawing a little bit, because here we have an entrance gate that's located down here. And if we look at a picture of it in our drawing, you can see that it's still there as is. There it is. Intact. It's empty now. On either side lived the porter. He was the monk who filtered who got to come inside the abbey. You can see that really nothing has been done with it in a long time, and I'm hoping that that will change soon. We also sometimes work from old postcards. So even a postcard that's 100 years old or 120 years old can give us information about how the buildings were, what the roof pitch was like, where there were fences, and so on. So you can see here they've planted very small trees. These trees have, of course, been replanted meantime. These are lime trees, and they need to be cut down and replanted again. But no mayor in my lifetime has wanted to cut them down, because then there'd be no shade in the road leading up to the abbey. So everybody kind of punts on that one. That's something that still needs to be done. You can see it here in a drawing from 1839, where the trees are growing a little bit bigger. There were 2 rows of them at the time, but the fence that you see here is actually still there. And the fence that you see here comes out further right to the main entrance to the abbey, whereas now it's quite a bit further back. So one of the things I'm doing here at St. Michael's College in the archives in my spare time is to look through the documents that were brought over by the Fathers of St. Edmund, who founded St. Michael's College. They come from Pontigny. St. Edmund was an Archbishop of Canterbury in the 13th century, who died and was buried and is still buried in Pontigny. And the Society of St. Edmund was founded in the 19th century at Pontigny, and took their name from the body of the saint who's buried there. So when they came over definitively in 1954, they brought their archives with them. So there are a lot of archives here that I'm currently working with. So when you go into the porch here, you come to this big door with these iron bars on it. We don't actually use that door very much now, because it creates a wind tunnel inside the abbey. They open it in the spring to try to warm the abbey up, because the abbey is like a giant solar collector in the summer and a freezing cold collector in the winter, so that at Christmas often they can't even hold mass in there because it's too cold by that time. It's often still cold in June when we have the first concert, but it warms up and stays warm into November. When we go in the side door, which is the one we now use, this is what you first see up through the north aisle, and you see the brightness, the abbaye de lumière, in the nave. This was taken from the organ loft, and you see that the hue of the color is a bit yellow. This tells me that I took this picture probably in the wintertime, because in the wintertime, the sun is low on the horizon and the light coming in is warmer. In the summer, when the sun is overhead, the light is much colder. So pictures taken in the winter look warm, and in the summer look cool. This is the abbey organ. It was bought in the 18th century and was installed then. It has been dismantled a couple of years ago and has been out being restored. And it's its pieces were just delivered back to the abbey last week. I had some photos sent by friends, but I don't think they put it back together yet again. Now, here's a summer picture, so you get to have an idea of how cool the abbey looks when the light is high in the sky, the sun is high in the sky and not coming directly inside the abbey. This big choir screen is in front of stalls that were built in the 18th century. The only indication I have about furniture in the abbey comes from that time when there was an inspection made of the abbey after the commendatory abbots left, and the monks again were allowed to elect their own abbey from one of themselves or one from another abbey. And they did an inspection of the whole abbey to see what kind of work was needed. And what they say about the monk stalls was they're all rotten and they need to be replaced. The benches are all rotten. So what is a bench? Does it have a back? I know nothing about it. So the only thing we know about the medieval furniture is that the monks had benches. This is a close-up of it in a historic postcard where you can see again lots of banners and paintings and things that no longer exist. This is the inside of the choir stalls. They're absolutely magnificent. There are spaces for 100 monks to sit. We know that in the Middle Ages, the novices would be in the middle, probably so the monks could keep an eye on them, and also so they could learn the different services from the prayer books that they were using. This is a historic picture of the same choir stalls with the door closed. You can see there are paintings up here. But the abbey, well, not the abbey, but the train station, which is about 400 yards from the abbey, was bombed in the Second World War. It was actually sabotaged. And here you can see what, these are some historic photos, again, that are here at the college library. We can see that the pictures came down off the frames. Some of the choir stalls were damaged and some of the windows came out. In fact, almost all the windows came out because the pressure from the explosion was so great. And here we have some choir boys, 1950. There was a school established by the Fathers of St. Edmund, and it ran for a while after the war until they sold the property. So here we have it in 1950 with some of the boys from the school who are sitting in the choir stalls. And this is what they look like today. Now, sometimes we, and by we, I mean the Amis de Pontigny, I founded an association some 35 years ago of people who wish to protect, preserve, and restore. Well, not restore, because we can't do that. It's a national monument, so we can't restore it, but we can promote it. We have concerts. We try to raise money in that way. We have a bookstore. And in 2014, we had to celebrate the 900th anniversary of the founding of the Abbey. We had a walkthrough of the play Murder in the Cathedral by T.S. Eliot. And these are all television personalities who came and played roles in that. We're in the choir stalls here, and they walk through it. And here you can see the man who played Becket. This is just as he's giving his last soliloquy before he's about to be stabbed, and that happens at this point. So we try to do historic things that were connected to the Abbey. Pontigny, of course, had in the early 20th century, had 10-day seminars that were run on all kinds of different themes. And anyone who was anyone in philosophy, literature, or the arts came to Pontigny for one of these decades, as they were called. I know that T.S. Eliot was there in 1933. He participated in it. Murder in the Cathedral came out in 1935. Did he get the inspiration when he was at Pontigny? I would love to think so, but he does come from England, and that took place in Canterbury, so hard to know. Beyond the choir stalls, we see up here the tomb of St. Edmund, and we see this enormous eastern end, or chevet, as we call it, that surrounds the altar. Here we come a little closer to it. There are several altars. This is the altar they use today. This is the altar from the 17th century when the church underwent a lot of remodeling. We can't use it today because it's unmovable, and the priest would have to have his back to the congregation, which of course is not done anymore. And back here we have St. Edmund's tomb with St. Edmund's altar beneath that, and occasionally one of the fathers will come from America and say Mass there. We also have an important figure buried at Pontigny underneath this tile, and that's Queen Adele, mother of Philippe Auguste, an early 13th century queen, who caused quite a scandal because the abbot let her walk around inside the abbey, and abbeys, Cistercian abbeys, are not allowed to have women come in them. But I think she's allowed in because I think she's giving the money to rebuild the eastern end of the church. So I guess we can pardon her. But it caused quite a scandal at the time. The abbot was punished and so on. Of course, Pontigny sits on a bed of clay. That clay is used all over the world for making roof tiles and bricks. And there are a lot of potters around Pontigny. And so they have, local people have made this creche scene that goes up every Christmas time. And then here we have the altar and tomb of St. Edmund. This is probably about his fourth tomb, dedicated in 1749, so we know quite a lot about it. What we don't know much about is where he was buried before that. Here we have the front and the back of it. If you walk around the ambulatory, you see you can walk behind there, and here, this is what it looks like from behind. Now, it used to have a stairway that led up to it with these 5 little doors where people could open the doors and see the Archbishop's slippers and his mitre and his ring and his staff and so on. After the explosion during the Second World War, that staircase was dismounted. But before that, there were a lot of pilgrimages to Pontigny to venerate the relics of Saint Edmund. This is the great Catholic pilgrimage of 1874, where they decided to come to Pontigny, and you see these drawings that were made of it at that time, and that appeared in an illustrated newspaper called The Graphic. A lot of people still couldn't read at that time, and so they had newspapers with lots of drawings in them, so people could understand what was going on. This one I always find it kind of amusing because there were people who hated the fact that the pilgrimage that year was in Pontigny. So they showed a picture of real pilgrims, almost barefoot or with wooden shoes, who are slogging through a marsh with wind and rain, going to, Canterbury perhaps, or Walsingham somewhere. And here we have modern pilgrims all dressed up with their lovely bustle dresses and their top hats, going by train to Pontigny. So there was a lot of fun made of them at that time. And this is what the outside of the tomb looks like today. They've dismounted the stairway that led up to it. This is what it looks like from an old postcard. And here, the person who drew the pictures of it maybe wasn't actually there, because imagine here you have the tomb between 2 columns. It's actually up here, and you could never get, I think it's 24 people I counted in that drawing, standing up there looking at it at once. But still, the idea comes across that they were very interested in coming to Pontigny to see this English saint, because of course, Edmund was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and they wanted to come and pay homage to him in Pontigny. This is what his body looked like in a postcard. The body was taken out of the sarcophagus in which it resides. I don't know when, but this is a postcard that dates probably to about the early 20th century. Now, this 1796 drawing that I used, and I still use to study a number of things, buildings connected to Pontigny, is only one of the ones we have. We have other drawings. This one is here at St. Michael's College, but sometimes these are useful, sometimes they're not. This one was used to try to allay the anger of the owner, the person who had bought the abbey in 1790. And there's a big dispute about who owns which buildings in here. So this is something that I'm working with to try to find out if it can tell us anything about the condition of the buildings at that time. This is another one that's here. It's a garden plan dating from 1811. I have published this one, but here you see the church is just this shadow. And what and as is the Lay Brothers building, what they've tried to do with this plan is to erase any sense of monastic history to it by making an English garden. And an English garden is one that meanders, and it has little walls and places to hide and kind of cute, pretty things and lots of open grass. And down here, you have an homage to a French garden, which is formal and symmetrical. Right, and that's down in the front of the Abbey grounds. It was never built, but or never made, but it was kind of fun to do the research on that and find out what had happened in the 30 or so years since the Abbey went up for sale. This is another plan. This one has to do with water. This one is interesting. This is the Serein River that runs nearby. Already in the 12th century, when Pontigny was founded, they put a bridge, not a bridge, excuse me, a dam here to bring water to the Abbey, right inside the Abbey. Right, and that is still there. It's called the Bief, now the canal. It fed the fish pond, and it also, of course, carried any wastewater away. This is another one. This has to do with the mills of Pontigny. So these are the sorts of things that survive that the Society of St. Edmund brought over with it when they came in the middle of the 20th century. Now, most of my work has been on what's going on with inside the Abbey itself and how was this Abbey built? How was Pontigny built? So I do study the grounds, but I'm especially interested in the church. People ask me, is Pontigny Gothic or is it Romanesque? Now, Romanesque is buildings built with, usually with a vaulted ceiling, that is a stone ceiling over it, because they were afraid of fire. You know, after the Romans left, building kind of fell into a slump for a few centuries. People built out of timber, or they might have built a stone building with a wooden roof. But buildings built with a stone roof are fireproof, and that's what they were trying to do. But you have to be careful about that, because if you put windows in it, you're weakening the structure. So Romanesque buildings tend to be smallish with very small windows, and they're dark. Of course, you know Gothic. Gothic has large windows, flying buttresses. It has lots of light on the inside, stained glass usually. Pontigny is a building between the two. It's what I call a hinge building. It's a building that started out Romanesque, and in the course of building, they turned it Gothic, or it has lots of Gothic elements on the inside. And that makes it an extremely important building for the evolution of architectural history. So I've spent a lot of my time over the last years, last decades, climbing around in it, taking pictures of it, and studying it in various ways. So what do we do? Well, the first thing I was able to determine, this is a photo taken from the east end. You see the transepts as they project out here, and this great big eastern end that replaced a much smaller eastern end, which was flat, did not have a lot of chapels, I think 11 extra chapels around it, and an ambulatory. That's a Gothic element. But it was done, I think, because they wanted more space on the eastern end. In any case, we don't have any evidence of fire or earthquake or anything that would indicate the necessity of rebuilding. The next thing I had to do was to make a plan. All right, so this is a plan of the church, and every pillar and wall and window has a number and a name. So literally every stone in this abbey is in my database. And the reason for that is when you talk about a building, you want to be able to talk very specifically about a pillar or a column or a capital or some element of the many, many thousands or even millions of stones that went into building this. Another thing we do is take advantage of things that I have no control over, like hurricanes. In December of 1999, France had a huge hurricane. You may remember that. And the roof had to be replaced. So I spent a lot of time up over the vaults, looking at the charpente, or the timber frame on which the roof rests. This part is 17th century, but the part over this transept is actually remaining from the 12th century. So we had much better light to work on it when we were up there than you do normally when it's covered over with the lathing and the tiles. Now, my current project is identifying the mason's marks. Every stone has a mark on it. Now, stones are quarried in big lumps, and the quarries are about 60 to 80 miles away. They're probably brought by river to Pontigny. And then in somewhere around the church, I don't know where, we've never been able to find it, there was the stonecutters' yard. And that's where the stonecutters cut the stones to fit the patterns that were used to build the building. So for example, if you want a column here, you need to have a certain number of drums, round stones that are cut exactly the same width to stack up one on top of the other and put the capital on top and then make up this column. So each one of these has a mark on it, but not all the marks are visible because some of the marks are in the wall. So we can only see a portion of those marks, and that's what we've been working on. This is my research partner, Jenny Alexander, who's the world's expert on mason's marks in medieval European buildings. And so Pontigny is going to be one of the best studied buildings in the world when we finish, which hopefully will be in the next few years. We can only work a few weeks a year because our calendars don't jibe. This is what a mason's mark can look like. Sometimes they're very beautiful. This one looks like an omega. And here we're using spotters. We usually have a team of 4 or 5. Somebody is a spotter with a laser and binoculars. That's usually me. Then there's Jenny with the camera. There's somebody with a computer. There's somebody with the lasers and the plans and the drawings and so on. And so every single mark is recorded. And of course, it has to go into the database according to its location. That way, when we run our stats, when we're eventually done, we'll be able to say, now, where are all of the marks with omegas on them? And that way we can try to tell where one of those masons, where that mason might have worked. Now, what do they signify? Well, we think they probably were for payment, so that at the end, we have no account books, of course, anymore. But at the end of, we don't know, week, month, 10 days, who knows, that stone cutter would be paid for the number of stones he cut based on the number of his mark on those stones. But more importantly than that, we think, is that when a stone was finished, it would go into the abbey to be placed by the masons. Masons are the placers of the stones. They're not the ones who cut the stones. And if a mason who's building that column gets a stone that's, let's say, 3 centimeters too large, he says, wait a minute, that's not the size of this stone. Who cut it? Ah, Roger. Send it back to Roger. It needs to be cut back. So it's a way of making the stonecutters responsible for following the patterns that they're given. Now, we have sometimes other ways of working. We try to see if they can help us. We have a drone, and we try to use drones, accepting that they're not as efficient as you might think. For one thing, they only do what you tell them. And for another thing, they are quite fast, and getting them to hover over each of the stones up there is really quite hard. So what we tend to do is to use builder's lamps, and something that's really much more old-fashioned and well, reliable. The drone system probably will work in time, but at the moment it's not perfected enough for our function. These are the kinds of marks that we find. We only have a couple of these, the trefoil. This one you can see up here, it's a very beautiful mark. And you might ask yourself, well, maybe that's a graffiti. It's something that's down, somebody wrote in it. Yeah, it could be, but this one is 60 feet off the ground. And you can tell that it's part of the capstone for this particular vault. And sometimes they're simple crosses, and sometimes they're even quite crude. Sometimes they're lovely. Sometimes they're just like slashed into the stone. Sometimes they have nail marks in them at the ends, which distinguishes them from those without nail marks. This is one of my favorites, a lovely star. It's growing in a very moldy place. And then we have variations. These are variations on ease. Now we think that the masons are probably illiterate, so these are not meant to signify their name. But what we do for our database is we catalog them under E, because they look like E's to us, and that helps us keep sane, because we have hundreds and hundreds of masons marks, and we have to keep a way to keep track of them. We have lots of V's. And sometimes we have two marks on a stone and we're not quite sure. Does that mean this is the mark of the stonecutter and this is a placement mark because we have lots of crosses there? These are things that we'll be working out as we start analyzing the material. And these are just some examples of other marks that we've found. And here's a graffito. Yes, this person took a mason's mark and then added onto it. So that we have examples of that as well. I think that, yes, the last thing I want to show you is that this is the land that's part of the sale, excepting the church. Right. So everything else, all the grounds and all the buildings in here are what have just been sold to a foundation that's going to make a Center for Contemporary Art at Pontigny. And with that, I will end and thank you for your patience.
A little bit more about it. You said it's just been sold. Do you understand it's been sold to an organization, a contemporary?
It's been sold to a foundation. It's the Francois Schneider Foundation. Francois Schneider has a passion for contemporary art, and he has the interesting idea of making 4 centers in France for contemporary art, each one based on the 4 elements. So the water one is already done and up and running. That's up in Alsace at a place called Villers. My husband and I were there last year. It's fabulous. He took an old water bottling factory, had it gutted. It's an Art Deco building, so it's lovely on the outside. The inside was gutted and made into galleries and bookshop, a snack bar, and offices, and so on. And then there's a glass wall, and outside there are other sculptures by very famous sculptors, by the way. He has a competition every year, and he buys a few of the sculptures every year. So Pontigny is the second project, and Pontigny is going to be earth. So water, earth, and of course, we're based on clay, built on clay. So there will be competitions around clay sculptures or anything to do with earth, I suppose. Then he's buying an extinct volcano in the Massif Central, where the theme will be fire. And he's buying an old windmill in the north of France, and the theme there will be air. And I asked him, how can people make sculptures about air? He said, not my problem. We'll hold a competition and see what they come up with. So I'm excited about this. I think there are some people who are not excited about it. You know, they don't think it should be a contemporary art center, but Pontigny has been for sale for 20 years. And there has been every form of money laundering project you can think of that they've tried to pull off. And pony clubs and hotels and other things really don't sit well. There will eventually be a hotel here and a restaurant. And I'm really kind of holding out for I guess a meal ticket to the 4-star canteen, maybe.
Okay, well, thank you. Yeah. We have a question which is in the chat or whatever. Was the original roof barrel vaulted or pitched as it is today?
No, a roof is not, the roof is not the vault. The roof is over the vault, right?
Yeah, okay.
No, it was ribbed vaulted, as you saw, and that's the first ribbed vault in Burgundy. Great. Barrel vault is, you couldn't have windows in a barrel vaulted building. It was intended to be, as far as I can tell from my study of the structure of the building, it was always intended to have ribbed vaults. Yeah. The very first project was groin vaults, not barrel vaults, but groin vaults. Okay. And then they moved into ribbed vaults.
Okay. Okay, thank you.
I've got a question, a quick one.
Yeah, Tony?
I'm thinking about the, for lack of a better word, standard of living for the monks in medieval times, the Dark Ages. Were the monks much better materially off, running water, gardens, animals, farm animals, than the people who lived around the abbeys? Was the motivation to be a monk economic at that time?
Well, we have very little evidence of that. We have some evidence of people wanting to become lay brothers. I want white bread and lots of it, you know, that sort of thing. Everybody had animals and land because it was a largely agricultural society. We don't know, we don't have statistics for this sort of thing. But at the time, you always wanted someone in your family to be a monk or a nun. or someone to pray for you and to pray for your soul. And so that's quite a common thing in the Middle Ages.
Okay.
Thank you.
Yeah. Other question. What happened to the plan that was in the chicken coop?
It's in the family. They have it somewhere, but they deny it.
Ah, okay. Yes. Okay. There are lots of things there. And someone wants to know where do you stay when you're there?
Oh, I have a house.
Yeah, you have a house there. Okay. Yeah.
Yeah.
You've been going there. You've been going there for so long.
So I spend half the year there. I'm a French citizen.
Okay.
I spent half the year there, and I just had a lovely pond put in my house, and
Okay.
and you can see the abbey from the pond.
Okay. Sounds lovely.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. Yeah. Very nice. Okay. Are there any more questions for the chat box? Okay. Merci showed up in there. Okay. My own tabulation of Gothic cathedrals for a little thing I wrote for the Alliance newsletter places Pontigny very early in the sequence of Gothic cathedrals, and I think, yeah.
Pontigny is not a cathedral.
No, I'm sorry. Okay, large Gothic religious buildings. Yes. Okay. Yeah. No, it's not a cathedral. Yeah.
Yeah. It's contemporary with Saint Denis in Paris. In fact, I think that possibly, well, Saint Denis was never finished, but they dedicated the facade in 1140 and the chevet in 1144, and then the middle part was never built during Abbot Suger's lifetime, but it was built later on.
Yeah.
And I think it's contemporary with that, because I have the building starting around 1137, and I've had to put that together just based on documents. There are 20,000 documents in the archives, but they don't talk about the building. You don't talk about a building unless you need to. The only kinds of documents I have that are useful are when they purchase a quarry, for example. You don't purchase a quarry if you don't need stone.
Yeah.
Or if they have a large-scale acquisition of forest rights, or they purchase forests because they're going to need the trees for scaffolding. Okay, so these are the sorts of things that we have. Alas, often one document will make 20 more questions rather than answering them.
Yeah.
So documents are not always helpful. I mean, we, of course, work with what we have. Yeah. Someone asked, what is the main product of the Abbey?
Yeah.
In modern times, abbeys sell a product, but I'm thinking at Spencer, Massachusetts sells Trappist jelly and jam.
Yeah.
Upstate New York, there's the Abbey of the Genesee, and they sell monk's bread. They didn't have a single product like that in the Middle Ages. They were self-sustaining, and that was the point. They had to be self-sustaining, so they consume what they make, and they don't sell it. Or if they do, I don't know about it.
Okay.
We are quite near Chablis, but we do know that the monks made their wine, but we have no indication that they sold it. For one thing, wine wasn't bottled commercially at that time.
Okay. Anything else from anybody? No, I think that's it. I thank you. I thank you as well.
You're welcome.
As a number of people said in the chat box, and grand merci for all of this. It's quite an evolution for a structure, complex, and all of this through this is what it's about 900 years now, just over
909.
909. Yes, yeah, that it's for the whole complex. So and obviously a life's work for you.
Well, I've done other things as well.
Yeah. But
I'm quite attached to Pontigny.
Yeah, it sounds that way.
Yeah.
Okay. Well, thank you very much.
And thank you for letting me be introduced to the Alliance Française community locally.
Yes, and and please, if you want to make, please come join us for other activities.
Right. Well, make a trip to Pontigny.
Yeah, we would love to. We would love to at one of these days. Yes.
Okay.
Okay. Well, thank you.
Bye.